taking advantage of artists is something that has happened for a long period of time. And this is the first kind of glimmer where I'm seeing that a lot of different brands are not doing that. It's like you want to celebrate and put the creator and the artist first versus limiting them and using them to make yourself look culturally relevant. And I'm starting to see that in this space, which is exciting. So I hope that even things that fall outside of Web3, I hope that they start to play along with that.
Hello, everyone. GM. Welcome back to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. I am so excited for today's episode. This is a conversation with someone I've wanted to have on for a long time. I've orbited her work and like her presence in this space for a long time. Y'all know her. She is Amber Vittoria. So just a prolific artist, poet, so talented. Forbes 30 under 30. She's done work for Facebook, Warby Parker, Adidas, Gucci, the New York Times, Snapchat, like literally every brand it feels like you could think of. She's worked with, won a number of awards for her designs and illustration. And I think most importantly, just creates work that really resonates for people and resonates for women, but across the board. So, so excited to have you on, Amber.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the Forbes 30 under 30 thing because when I'm 80, I'm going to have people still intro me as that. Yeah. Some people ask me, they're like, are you still under 30? I'm like, no, but thank you. Yeah. So I was like, even when I'm old, I'm going to put that in there just because I think it's funny, especially now that I'm no longer under 30.
Well, by the time you're 80, we're going to have Forbes 80 under 80. You know what I mean? Like,
I hope
expanded this to everything.
I hope so. That would be awesome.
And the other important part of your intro that I should say is you have a book coming out in January, which we're going to talk about. It's so cool you've written a book. Yay. I think I heard you say that was like a bucket list item for you for a while. So we'll get into what that journey has been like.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah. Hopefully now I can write more than one.
I have no doubt. Your career is feels like just been you have willed your career into an existence in such a beautiful way that I have no doubt you will continue to do so. Okay, and before we dive into all this good stuff, your work, your background, etc., we do need to hear a word from our lovely, lovely sponsors.
COINSHIFT is a leading treasury management and infrastructure platform for DAOs and crypto businesses that need to manage their treasury operations. Every crypto org needs to manage its treasury, and COINSHIFT offers a simple, flexible, and efficient multi-chain treasury management platform built on top of the highly secure Gnosis Safe. With COINSHIFT, your organization can go from primitive single-chain treasury management to expressive, flexible, and multi-chain treasury features, such as global user management, global contacts, proposal management, and many other features that can be shared across an entire organization, allowing users to save time and reduce operational burdens and gas costs. COINSHIFT even has data tools like account reporting across the 7 chains on which it operates. Used by industry powerhouses such as Uniswap Grants, Balancer, Consensus, and Masari, COINSHIFT is speeding up the coordination and efficiency of the organizations that use it. You have to keep up with the frontier, and COINSHIFT makes that easy. So sign up at coinshift.xyz/bankless. When it comes to NFTs, convenience often wins over security, despite scams being everywhere. Brands and artists have no other choice by complying with big marketplace terms and weak security because no good alternative exists, which is what prompted Ledger to fix the problems of NFTs themselves and launch Ledger Market. The Ledger Market provides an end-to-end secure NFT experience for brands, artists, and users, enabling true ownership and control over NFT assets, from minting to storing. Ledger Market secures NFT projects via Ledger Enterprise, keeping you protected from phishing attacks and scams. And the market directs users to Ledger Live, where they can transact with a contract directly, giving clear signing details instead of blind signing and praying. Don't trust, verify with clear signing from Ledger Market. Stay up to date on the latest drops and the marketplace updates by following Ledger on Twitter and joining the Ledger Open Discord, which is linked in the show notes below.
Okay, I don't usually do tell me your backstory on this podcast, because typically I'm like, let's talk about whatever in the now. But I think for artists, it's really helpful to get a sense of where they came from. So when did you first know that you wanted to be an artist?
I would say the first kind of hint was when I was about 11 years old. Our middle school had a program where you could take a high school level art class in middle school, but you would have to apply for it. So it was a 1-year class spanned over 7th and 8th grade. You would apply in 6th grade. You needed a still life, a drawing of your choice, and then a watercolor, which in hindsight, watercolor. But anyway, I was working on one of those drawings, which was actually puppy wrapped in an American flag. It was from like one of those images from a magazine of like animals that I liked. And I was like drawing on our living room table, and my mom was sitting on the sofa behind me, and she's like, have you ever thought about becoming an artist when you grow older? And I was like, you can do that? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, that's awesome. So
you're like, yes, I do. I have now thought about it.
Exactly. So that was the first time where those wheels started to turn, just because, you know, when you're little and like you see things on TV and just like the people in your life, like, you know, my dad's an accountant, you know, and my uncle is a lawyer and like things like that. So you just kind of assume that you have to do like, that's a job. And, you know, your 11-year-old brain hasn't yet expanded into thinking like what else could be your, you know, livelihood. So when my mom said that, I was like, oh, and that's kind of when I prioritized art as much as I could, because it just is what I loved the most doing as a kid and what I love doing the most as an adult.
Did you ever have doubts, or put another way, like, what do you think gave you the confidence to just be like, I'm full steam ahead doing this? Because I think there are a lot of people who want to be artists in any number of different ways, and really fear prevents that.
I would say the only doubts that I could recall when I was younger, especially, were just other teachers within both middle school and high school that taught math and science. And like, you're so good at these things. Like, this is going to be so much more stable for you as an adult, as a job. And I remember saying, I like these things because I'm good at them now. But obviously, if you're doing something for your whole life, you're not always going to be good at them. And I don't want to do something just because I'm good at it. I want to do something that I enjoy regardless if I'm good at it. So with art, I would make drawings, and I still make paintings that are complete shit, but it doesn't matter because I love that process and I learn from that, and that fuels me for the next piece that I make. Whereas with, you know, math and sciences and other topics, it's just something that I was good at it in middle school and in high school, and that's why I enjoyed it. And I was pretty self-aware, surprisingly, at that age about that. So that caused a little doubt to hear, you know, from people that you look up to, luckily not my family, but, you know, teachers saying like, oh, like, it's gonna be really difficult to be an artist. And I remember my mom saying, every job is difficult. Like, every job that you do, regardless of what you do, is really difficult. So you're gonna have those ups and downs. So you may as well at least pick something that brings you joy. So that kind of reinstilled that confidence at that point in my life.
A lot of insight on your part at that age, and then it sounds like insight from your parents as well. Have you been back to your high school at any point and like seen those teachers and been like, oh yeah, you know, like I make a living as an artist now. Yeah, it's going great.
I've been back, but I mean, not since before the pandemic. I went back to chat with the art class that I took. So some of my teachers are still there, and they're awesome. But no, I don't know. I'm not the type of person to like rub it in another person's face. Cause I mean, like, you know, we all go through our things, and like, we all have stereotypes about things that, you know, some people break through and some people still live by. So I don't know. I don't think that if I were to go back, I'd be like, hey, look at me now. Yeah, I don't think I would do that. That feels awkward even just saying that.
Danny Cole said a similar thing, because I asked him sort of a similar question. But I also see it as there's an element of like, you know, it's coming from a good place. Those teachers are probably are just saying it because they want you to be okay. And I think it's valuable to show them like, okay, but there are alternatives. Like, it can actually go okay as well. And maybe the next time you're talking to a student, like, instead of just shutting the dream down altogether or telling you how hard it's going to be, like, talk about what it takes to, you know, it's going to take hard work and discipline and like, you know, whatever, you know, kind of share that perhaps without just shutting it down.
I think that I got a lot of that from my art teachers, because one of them is an illustrator for DC Comics. He still does comic books with them, I believe. And another used to be a designer at IBM, both before they taught, but also the former in parallel to him teaching. And that was really helpful, because they're like, yeah, of course it's difficult. Like, any job is difficult, but like these are the steps that you can take to find where you want to be within the world of art realistically. So that was really helpful too. So I think that kind of gave me a concrete setting to be like, okay, if I wanted to be a comic book artist, this is what I would do. If I wanted to be a designer, which I started off being, this is what I would do. So that was also really helpful to have high school teachers like that.
Do you think the fact that you have, it sounds like, also an orientation towards math and science has impacted your art or bled into your art in any ways? Like, I think that multi-brain creative is such a cool thing.
Thanks. I would think so, loosely. Everyone else in my generation, in my family that aren't super young, I've got very young cousins that are still little, but that are close to my age, are all doctors or nurses besides me. I'm the lone artist. So thus far, I've got some hope for the younglings. But so I do think that it's somewhere in my mind. Definitely have a love for and appreciation for math and science. Just, hearing my brother talk about his MD PhD, even though, after a few words, I kind of don't know what he's talking about, but that's fine. But I do think that that way of thinking does affect my work. Also because I studied graphic design in college. So that also is parts of it could be like very rigid or grid oriented when you're making a design. So there is a lot of math to it, but not in a way that's like calculus or anything. But spatial relationships are important within art. And I think that's something that I definitely learned from math, science, and then design. And I definitely subconsciously put that in my own work.
So you go to design school, you're in Boston, and then was your first job out of school for Victoria's Secret?
Yeah. So I freelanced a lot in college, and when I first graduated, it took me about 6 months to find the job at Victoria's Secret. After I graduated, I moved back home. I grew up an hour and a half north of New York City, and then I commuted to VS. At the time, they were like close-ish to Columbus Circle, so I would just take the train down into Grand Central and then over to 57th Street, and then I go to work and then go back home. It'd be 2 hours in, 2 hours out, which was in hindsight, youth is how I did that. I don't think I could do that now, a 4-hour commute each day. But Victoria's Secret was great because I still have a lot of friendships of folks that have worked there and left or still work there. And it really taught me how to work creatively on a team. So it was really nice to be able to take everything that I learned in school. I feel like a lot of school projects are very singular focused, or you do a lot of projects on your own. Sometimes you do group projects, but most of them are solo driven. But when you work, you're on an entire team, whether that team is, front end development and creative and back end development. Like, your team is very big and you all have to coordinate and work together to make a product that people want to use. So that's really where I got that experience. And I was super excited to have had that, minus the commute. But then I moved into the city and I got rid of the commute, which was nice.
Have you heard the Victoria's Secret song, or the I know Victoria's Secret, the one that got really big on TikTok about how it's, you don't know this? Oh my God, Amber, I think you would love this. Okay, I'm going to tell this story very briefly. A woman who had a TikTok following, but babysits this little girl, created this song for the little girl. The little girl went shopping at Victoria's Secret for her first boy-girl pool party bikini. And she had some girl make a nasty comment to her, like, you're too fat and you're too flat. And so her babysitter wrote this song being like, I know Victoria's Secret, girl, you wouldn't believe it. It's an old man who lives in Ohio making money off of girls like me. And, kind of like really pushing back on Victoria's Secret. I'm curious. It's amazing. I'm sending it to you. I can't believe you haven't heard this. I think you'll love it.
That is awesome.
And it's also like a banger of a song. Like, aside from even just like the message.
Yes, please send that to me. That is amazing. Yeah, also the message. And I think that even though working there, team and design wise was really informative, when you're looking at images of women that look a very specific way day in and day out, even if you don't realize you're working on the typography over the photos or things like that for the website, I never really had too many body confidence issues until my early 20s. And I think it took several years for me to realize that that was definitely a contribution to why I started to have issues with how I viewed myself, because you're looking at, models that are all, at least 6 feet tall, maybe 110 pounds. And like, all of them are white. They all look the same. And it's like, I feel like that's why so many people struggle. I mean, I can't speak for everybody in the world, but I feel like it contributes to how people view themselves, because you view this quote unquote ideal that men make, given that Victoria's Secret was owned by, or still is owned by, limited brands, all owned and ran by men. It definitely kind of plays with your mind. So I didn't realize that until a few years later when I started making the like figurative work that I did make for a long time, because I struggled to see myself in advertising, and that definitely contributed to it. But at the time, I didn't realize, because I probably so tired from commuting in and out every day that like my mind was just like, oh, this is a problem. You'll address it later when you have the time.
Yeah, we can't reflect on this right now and handle this workload.
So that song, I mean, is the truth. I think since it's been nice to see, like, I still get like, ads in the mail from VS every now and then that they're starting to use models that are people, versus, professional models. And I do think that that will help, but, I hope more companies do that more quickly, because I still, you open a magazine, or even Fashion Week this year, I went to one show, which was cool, but, I go to all the shows on my phone because of Instagram, and the diversity of models was really slim. I feel like it was a big backslide. So it's tough, being a person in the world and not being able to see yourself, reflected back at you as an ideal. So hopefully that'll change across the board in fashion and accessories and things like that.
Yeah. I heard you say in another interview, and I've thought about this too, where it's like there have been times because of Victoria's Secret models, this or that, like, you feel inadequate, and it's like, gosh, we're like, like straight body size, like white women, like we are in so many ways fit the ideal. Like you think if like we feel like, oh, I'm not seen, like God, like what so much of the world must feel is wild. You went from Victoria's Secret to VaynerMedia?
I was at VS for about a year and a half. And, editing the same thing day in and day out got a little fatiguing. At that point, I moved into the city so I could kind of work outside of the realm of Grand Central area. And I knew I wanted to work for myself at some point. So I was like, I want to find a place where I could juggle multiple clients, preferably not fashion, something else, so I could kind of push and expand, my vernacular as a designer and as an artist. And VaynerMedia, one of my friends from college, Jessica Friedowitz, who's still there, she works at one of their other companies called Sasha Group, I believe is a creative director, which is awesome. She's like, hey, I'm a designer at this place called Vayner. And like, I remember she sent me the website. She's like, this is Gary Vaynerchuk and his brother AJ. And I was like, I don't know who those people are, but cool, I'll apply. So I got the job. And then I remember on my interview before I got the job, I think it was like Inc. magazine had like Gary on the cover. And I was like, wow, this dude's on the cover of a magazine. And like opened it up and I was like reading the interview because I was nervous and trying to distract myself. But the interview, he said something like, you can't approach every single social media platform as the same. They're all different. And me, as someone that didn't have an Instagram until that point, barely used Facebook, and like, I think I had a Twitter, and I would just like tweet at celebrities that I liked and complain to airlines when I was traveling. That really clicked for me. I was like, oh, this is going to be fun, like to make artwork for these social platforms. So I got really excited. And then I was like, well, I hope I get this job. But yes, long short of it, I did get that job, and I was there for about 2.5 years. I was a designer, and then I got promoted to art director before I left.
And I've heard you talk about Vayner was just different than other agencies that were out there at the time. And is it because of the deep understanding of social, or what made Vayner feel different to you?
I think it's a combination. The first part is that it was very social heavy, whereas most other ad agencies, whether creative based or, marketing based, they were more focused on the more traditional forms of media, television, print, out of home. And Vayner was probably at the forefront, I would say, of social media. I remember people would ask me, they were like, wait, you make artwork for Facebook for brands? And I was like, mm-hmm. And then eventually paid media happened, and now brands spend millions of dollars on all of these platforms. But back then, even though it wasn't that long ago, I started in 2000. What year is it? 2014? Yes, 2014 to 2016. I was in 2004, and I was like, wait, no, I was still a teenager. 2014, even though that wasn't that long ago, brands were very hesitant to use social media for advertising. And then really quickly, I think, thanks to people like Gary and other people that were higher up at VaynerMedia, explained why this is where the attention was. And it is obviously true. So I really liked it for that reason. But the second part was I had friends that worked at other ad agencies or creative agencies, and the hours were wild. Even though working at Vayner was still tough on the work-life balance, as are all agencies, other agencies in New York City, it was like you did not have a life. It was as if you were, a resident, first year resident as a doctor, which I don't know. That didn't appeal to me. So I really wanted to find a place that, valued the people that worked there. And I felt that Vayner did a very good job of that, even though they are an ad agency.
And in those early days, how much of it was data driven of like, we're looking and seeing that this kind of art performs well, or these color palettes work well, stick to these? And how much was there creative freedom for you as the artist to play?
It would depend on the client. So especially in the beginning, because there was no paid media when I started, and I'd say halfway through my time at Vayner, paid media became a thing on Facebook where people could pay for adverts on Facebook, on Instagram, and then eventually Twitter and all the other ones. So in the beginning, it was just a lot of playing and storytelling for that brand. So if it was a food brand, I was on a few food brands, like is pretty much just telling stories that way and seeing what resonated and what didn't resonate, and just kind of loosely going into the direction of the story where people felt like they could interact with it. And then as paid media started to come along, obviously putting dollars behind something makes it slightly more precious. So I feel like that's when a lot of the data, especially from the paid media team, would come in and be like, hey, this performed well with comments, or this performed well like with shares. And then you would start to gaze and gauge that and start to create creative strategies that would either push in that direction or kind of pull from it. So I would say there was a lot of creative freedom, but obviously within the confines of a brief from a client. So similar to any freelance work that I've done in the past too.
And so then you transitioned from VaynerMedia into freelance work. What made you really want to step out onto your own and leave a more, call it, corporate environment?
So I knew I always wanted to work for myself when I was back in college, when I started finding freelance jobs on Craigslist. I was like, this is fun. Like, I get to be my own boss. I would do that through Victoria's Secret, got a little tough, the commute. And then at Vayner also got a little tough with the hours. And I was like, you know what, I want to put this in the forefront. I'm still young. At the time I left Vayner, I was 25, almost 26. I was like, we're going to figure this out. So I found another design job. I went to Avon full time. Their hours were 9 to 5. It was similar to Victoria's Secret, minus the commute. I would get in probably about like 8:30, and then I'd leave shortly before 5. And that afforded me a lot of mental bandwidth, but also physical bandwidth in the mornings and then the evenings and on the weekends to, put my own artwork out there. I've been making a lot of work for myself. I hadn't really shared it at that point. I learned a lot at VaynerMedia from how to share brand stories on social media. So I was like, well, I can do that for myself. I'm a human. It should be slightly easier. Spoiler alert, it's still difficult. But, when it comes from you, it's more authentic than, being written by somebody else. So I took all that and I started to put that out there with the time that I had back. And I was at Avon for, I think, a little less than a year and a half. And I built up enough of a freelance client list that I was like, I think if I adjust some things that I can take this leap into full-time freelance. So December of 2017, I, gave my notice to Avon and then started freelancing fully. Obviously there's a few caveats there. I had the privilege of not having much student debt. My parents kind of took that debt on for me. I had some loans directly to me that I paid off with like my high school job. So there's a privilege in that financially, but then also I lived or still live with my now husband, then boyfriend. Anyway, so he had a full-time job. He also works at VaynerMedia. That's how we met. So God forbid I couldn't make rent or utilities payment or anything like that. Like he can always cover. So there was a few things there privilege-wise that gave me the confidence to be like, okay, I think I could do this. At the time, I didn't really have any health problems. Since I've had all of them develop. So I don't know what that means, but at the time I was like, we're young, we're healthy. We live with someone, with a partner that could support us. God forbid this turns south, and worst case scenario, we get another full-time job. So that was kind of all going through my mind at that time when I decided to start freelancing. And it's been almost 5 years, which is wild. It feels like a blink of an eye and an eternity at the same time.
BUENO is the NFT toolkit you need to launch your digital collectible on the blockchain without coding. Every step of the NFT creation process, from generation to mint, all taken care of by the BUENO NFT toolkit. With Bueno, you can load up your properties, reorder the layers, tinker with rarity, everything you need to make the perfect NFT project. Bueno even takes care of advanced minting logic like allow lists, token balances, surveys, and email collection to make sure that you are hooked into your own community. There are even Discord role integrations to make sure that your Discord gets buzzing. Bueno is full of the powerful tools you need to build the most expressive NFT project possible. So go to bueno.art and start building your own little microverse inside of the metaverse today. Do you buy NFTs? Do you like playing in the profile picture games or searching for underpriced rares? Or you're part of an NFT community and you want that sweet social experience that your NFT brings you? Of course you want these things. It's why you're listening to this podcast, and it's also why you should check out SINTRA. SINTRA is the most powerful and friendly all-in-one time saver for NFT investors. A new social-fi investment app with real-time sales, floor price tracking, Twitter mentions, and 700,000 wallets, all available to check out. All infused into a social experience to connect you with other like-minded NFT investors. In Sintra, you can do your social media things like post, reply, share, ask questions, react, right next to where you showcase your beloved and cherished NFTs. And you also get a customizable feed of NFT activity, keeping you up to speed with the always changing meta of the NFT world. If you're not using Sintra, you're falling behind. So go to sintra.com/bankless and connect your wallet to enter the world of Sintra.
And how did you get those early clients? I think I heard you say at another point, like it was a lot of outreach by you to brands. Like how would you spend hours like researching their work and then customize a pitch to them? Was it more general? How did you approach that?
It would depend on the brand. Usually it would be a little bit more general, just like an intro email, like, hi, I'm Amber. This is my work. I really love your brand because of XYZ. I'd love to work together. And then if they would get back to me, great. If not, that's fine too. And that's really how a majority of my work would come through, and still does. Every so often you get the nice surprise of an email being like, hey, we want you to do this project. And you're like, ooh, yes, thank you. But in the beginning, especially, it was just me putting myself out there as much as possible and just kind of being shameless with, reaching out to people that I knew, that I didn't know, and slowly building that over time.
What do you think brands resonated with in your work so much? Or you clearly had a tremendous amount of success getting brands to work with you. Is it like, you're obviously incredibly talented, but like, are there tips you have for other artists who are trying to go freelance? We're trying to did you have a great little attachment that you put in those emails? What would you attribute it to in addition to, again, your obvious talent?
Thank you. I would say that a lot of the brands would resonate with the work that I'd make. My work started off more figurative and then over time became more abstract. But the core of all of my work, at least in the last, 5 to 10 years, have been, to celebrate being a woman and also showing the struggles of being a woman within our society. So whether that was figurative or more abstract, if we're talking about my more recent work, I think that the brands I was reaching out to, that was something that was very important to them. Most of them were startups, now have become bigger brands, which is exciting to see. But that narrative, I think, is what really resonated. I do think that storytelling is incredibly important, especially online, because we lose so much nuance when we're not in person. So to be able to clearly tell the story that means a lot to you, whether you're an artist or a content creator, is really important, because then it could resonate with that person that you're trying to work with across the screen.
I think that's so fantastic. And from this standpoint, I sometimes worry, when we talk about there's a lack of women in Web3 or in this space or that space, it almost could have a counterproductive effect, right? Where you have women who hear that, who then go, okay, why would I want to go do that then? And I always want to strike that balance between being let's recognize the problem, but let's do it in a way that doesn't then just scare off more people from joining. And there's obviously been a lack of representation in agency work or in brand work in the past. I know that's one of the reasons you started doing the kind of work you did, was representing women in a way that you felt like you didn't see. And to hear that brands responded to that is so positive. It speaks to just go and try and do it. Don't come in with preconceived notions of they don't want, the fact that they haven't had different representations of women means they don't want those different representations. Put it out there, and it actually may be a part of the success of a project. I think that's a really important message to put out there for people.
I agree. Especially, that's actually a great point of how I got into Web3. When I first started selling my work, part of my hesitation was that it was a male dominated space, and my work very much speaks to and about women. And I was like, this is not going to land in this space at all, especially seeing what was landing. I was like, I don't know, guys. And by guys, I mean me and myself. So I was just like, I don't know. But I did it anyway. I mean, obviously I started and then I paused because it was really expensive. And during being a freelancer during the pandemic wasn't the easiest. But then once I learned about OpenSea and lazy minting, I was like, okay, the only risk is my work doesn't resonate. It's not like I'm spending all this money and it doesn't resonate. So removing the financial risk really kind of helped me. But I think to your point, it's important to say, like, yes, of course, this is a gap. Every new emerging technology is always male dominated just because of the way society is built. But that doesn't mean that we can't change that, especially in something that's more decentralized. So I like that. Yeah. Because you're not trying to scare off people. Because I was definitely scared in the beginning. I was like, oh, God. Here we go.
Totally. It's a funny balance to strike. You know, I think I sometimes shy away from talking about this stuff on the pod because I kind of like the idea of just like, hey, I'm just a woman and I'm here and I love this stuff just like everybody else. And like not kind of, for me, like having to make it about the womanhood. Like I'm like, I think there are women out there who will respond to that, who will just like being like, oh, cool. Like she just is like likes this, you know? So it's always a balance to strike. You talk about marketplaces and minting on OpenSea. I know you've worked with Super Rare. I mean, you've worked with a lot of different platforms. Do you have a take on marketplaces, things you think you're not seeing in the marketplace space, places where they could evolve, platforms you've liked working with, or why? Would love to get your perspective on all of that.
Yeah, I've worked with not all of them because there are many that I've never even heard of, but I've worked with OpenSea, Coinbase. I have worked on Super Rare. I've collaborated with the other projects that have dropped on Super Rare. They've also featured my work, which is exciting. I have a few coming up with new platforms over the next few months that I'm working with. And I think the best thing about this space, especially coming as a commercial artist, is that usually when you work with one type of company or one type of platform, they're very much like, you can't work with other platforms, which is tough because it makes it like they're using the artist and then they're limiting you as an artist. Whereas in Web3, every single platform that I've worked with is like, yeah, do your own thing, like work with whomever, like as long as it doesn't overlap with what we're doing, like, you know, if it's like in tandem, like live your life. And I really love that. I think that shows that platforms are more in this space are more about onboarding more people and educating more people versus trying to fight against each other for that percentage when people do buy and sell. I think it's more of finding their own niche in their own pocket, and people will gravitate towards different ones for different reasons throughout their period within Web3. So that's been the most exciting thing, is that there's less of this like competition, at least for me as an artist. Like you don't really see it written into contracts having non-competes that are extreme. And I hope that brands that onboard into Web3 follow suit. I think it's like you want to celebrate and put the creator and the artist first versus limiting them and using them to make yourself look culturally relevant. And I'm starting to see that in this space, which is exciting. So I hope that even things that fall outside of Web3, I hope that they start to play along with that, because taking advantage of artists is something that has happened for a long period of time. And this is the first kind of glimmer where I'm seeing that a lot of different brands are not doing that, that they're here to push and celebrate the artist first instead of kind of taking from them. So I give credit to all the platforms in this space for doing that.
There's also arguably a business case to be made for that, which falls in line with like CC0 and the concept of like, if you let work proliferate, like it'll come back and benefit you, right? If you're Super Rare and you as Amber have work on Super Rare but you've been discovered by a bunch of people on OpenSea, that probably ultimately ends up helping your work on Super Rare. And I think you see certain mainstream brands starting to catch on to this. An example is like Minions. There was just a piece in the Wall Street Journal about this, but I've talked about it previously, where like Minions, which is a Universal property, has like proliferated into this like cultural icon that has been incredibly valuable for Minions, the IP brand. And it's because they didn't enforce copyright really strictly. And you compare that to Disney, who's been much stricter, and not that Disney hasn't succeeded, but like Mickey Mouse isn't a ubiquitous character in some ways, like on like a party balloon sign and just in day-to-day life, the way that Minions characters are. And
so true.
I think there's a parallel there that I'm optimistic the world is moving towards, as we understand, like it's actually just good if work proliferates, and like you're fighting in the attention economy. Why would you limit the places that Amber's work can be seen, you know?
It's true. Yeah. And I think that's a great point. I think when I was on a spaces, I think Farouk had a spaces where I just like joined one night, and like Grant Yoon was there, and his work is all CC0, I think. I'll have to fact check that, but I really want to say it is. And my work isn't, because I license my work out. And it was a great conversation because I like that there are options for artists now. If you want to make your artwork CC0 and like let people iterate on it, I think that's fantastic. The reason why I haven't done it is because women so often get erased from art history. Having taken art history in school, you learn about all the men that are famous. Or if you go to museums too and you see it categorized by movement, creative movements, you'll see like all of the men that everybody knows their names, and like one or two women that you're like, I haven't heard about this person, and they were the ones that kind of started this movement. That's kind of interesting. So I think in a world that already takes so much from female artists, I don't want to give a bigger platform for people to take, because women historically get taken advantage of within the art world. So that's my only reason why I haven't done CC0. And I think that we had that conversation too. And David Horhath, I believe is his last name, the one that does the Ugly Dolls, and Ugly Dolls are not CC0, but his new NFT stuff is. And that was really interesting too. So he's like, depending on your goals as a creator, if you want to curate, like you just said, like Disney, if you want it to be more curated, then don't do CC0. But like, if you don't mind, then you can. But I kind of fall in the middle. Sometimes I enforce it. If it's like, I could have gotten paid and like paid my rent for several months from that ripped off work, then I'll go after it. But if it's something like someone made an iteration of my work and then sold it, usually I'm like, I let it go. So,
so
I
you've had that where you've
of
seen work of yours sell for a lot of money
often.
and it...
Or like usually not sell for a lot of money, not as NFTs. Sometimes I don't think anything is NFTs, but like people will like rip off my work, or companies will rip off my work, especially overseas, because it's a lot harder to enforce, and use it on packaging or on product. And like 9 times out of 10, it's not even worth to go after. Usually I'll do a cease and desist if it's like, if enough people be like, oh my God, did you do this? I'm like, no, slightly offended that you thought I did that. Then I'll send a letter being like, stop. But it's very rare that you'll win any money from cases like that. I think I've gotten like 1 or 2 where like you can just like reach out and settle with them, be like, hey, you used my work without my consent, and then they'll send it. So it's definitely a gray area, and it's interesting because that Minions example is such a great example about like it hits like the cultural zeitgeist, and it's everywhere, and everyone knows what a Minion is because they were looser on those restrictions, whereas Disney is tighter. Yes, even though many folks, Mickey Mouse is old enough where everyone knows Mickey Mouse, it's slightly different. So it is an interesting take to kind of see how those different things play out. But until I know, like feel more comfortable, like in my long term, like if I'm like, okay, I know that I can support myself long term, then I'll feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But if I know that like, there's a risk of me not being able to support my livelihood, I'll probably hold off until I know that I could. And, just given the history of art and women, that's my hesitation. But hopefully we could change that for the future in Web3. And I'm already starting to see that, which is really encouraging.
And I totally agree. I think what we don't want is a world where everything is the same. Like it's not one size fits all. I think CC0 is really cool. And true. I don't think it makes sense for all work. And as a holder, there's work I want to not be CC0. And then there's work that I think it's really cool if it is CC0. Yeah. So I definitely think living 100%. In like a multi-optional world is the way to go. I want to talk about your book next, but why is it so hard to win cases or for there to be recourse when people are clearly stealing your work?
I think that especially if it's done overseas, I mean, it can't really be enforced.
That's why it's so hard, the jurisdiction.
Because copyright law jurisdiction, it's easier in the United States. The US has some things where like, even though everything you make, you have copyright to, if you really want to win a case, like you have to file with the Copyright Office for a certificate, which is fun and expensive. And you get a whole stack of certificates and you're like, okay. But I would say that the handful of times that it's happened, it's usually like outside of the country. Usually it's not done intentionally because people find things on Google, they trace them, they change 1 or 2 things, and then they think that's okay. Obviously, like you have empathy for that because it's clearly a junior designer or artist that didn't realize where it came from and all of that. I would say the 2 times where it's usually just easier to settle. You don't have to use a lawyer or anything. The 2 times where I've gotten compensated, one was a real estate agency used my artwork in digital mock-ups for a whole high-rise building down in Brooklyn. My husband and I were he was showing me the listing before, and I was like, that's my artwork. I was like, hold on. I was like, is this like this person's house? Like, is this? And he's like, no, this is a new building. I don't even think it's done yet. And I'm like, oh, because if it's someone's house and my art's in it, like that's kind of dope. But if it's like digitally staged and every single room had my artwork in it, and I was like, what the hell? So
also kind of flattering though.
Yeah, I know. I was like, oh, that's actually a cool design. Thanks. But I remember I found out who to reach out to, and I was like, hey, this makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable because I would usually be compensated for something like this. And they were like, well, we could pay you like X. We know that that's not probably what you would have negotiated. And I was like, thank you. I appreciate that. And then another time, a friend of mine lives in Brazil, and she was like, this book cover looks a lot like your artwork. Like it looks like the form of one artwork and the color palette of another. And it was. And I tried to reach out to the publisher. I remember posting on social media, like, if anyone can please connect me to these people just so I can chat about it, because I think it's not my art. They finally reached out to me, and then they changed the cover to an artwork that I made and then compensated me for the other work. So since then, I've learned a lot, though. I feel like when I was younger and I was first starting out, I was like, I'm a freelancer. Like I have to do everything I can to protect myself. And now that I've had the privilege of working a few years and getting my work out there, I think I'm a bit looser. We're like, I'm not going to post that stuff on social media unless it's like, hey guys, didn't make this, don't buy it, just to protect those that are collecting things from me. But outside of that, I'm definitely a little looser on that stuff. I think that I remember I DM'd an artist named Cause, which I was surprised that he got back to me because it's like he has a bajillion followers. And I asked for his advice, and I'm paraphrasing, but his advice was like, if it's like life changing, where it's like someone took your work and made their entire company branding out of it, and it's like something that is serious and you should go after, great, do it. But other than that, he was like, you should let it go. He's like, you should see my inbox where it's of things that are ripped off of my work. And that helped me, I think, a lot. So I think it's a combination of, privilege of being a freelancer for long enough, and then also maturing as a human being and not taking everything so personally. But every artist is different. Everyone has a different approach to it. But I think that we're all visual people. We all live in parallel to each other. People compare work all the time, even though they're not the same. But my rule of thumb, if it's if this thing was on a thing that I didn't approve, I'll probably say something about it. But other than that, I feel like the mental anguive sometimes isn't worth it,
Yeah. Well, there's
definitely a gray area.
We don't have time right now because we've got a time window here that we have to operate within. But I would love to have you back and just talk about is there potential for NFTs to solve some of this? Again, easy licensing, buy an NFT licensing right to use 100%. Work. Really excited about the potential there. Also, royalties. Obviously, a lot of conversation around artist royalties and platforms and things. But we don't have time to get to that stuff. I want to close with just talking about your book, and then we'll have you back on to talk about those other things. So your book is coming out in January, but it's available for pre-order now. These are my big girl pants. Where does the title come from?
Yes. So this book that title comes from one of the poems that are within the book. And the idea is it's very much about re-becoming yourself. So it's similar to coming of age. So I feel like, when you're younger and, grow older and you grow into yourself, I think that happens several times in our lives. At least it's happened several times in my life thus far. And I really wanted this book to celebrate that. It's you're learning, you're experimenting, you're kind of figuring your way throughout life as you grow and become the next version of yourself. So kind of putting on your big girl pants or your adult pants and kind of working through all those fun things that are becoming the new version of who you're going to become. So I'm really excited. Like we were chatting about earlier, it's a life goal of mine to have written a book. Now I want to write more, which is why pre-orders are so important. I've heard from my artist friends who are also authors. So even though it comes out in January, I am kindly begging people to pre-order it beforehand so I could get another book, because it was really lovely to make that book.
Awesome. That's such a good appeal to folks. And it's true. Yeah. Your first week sales numbers are determined heavily determined based on pre-sales and things. And that's such a big metric for publishers and things. So I will second it for you. Go grab it. I have it. I have the page up. I'm going to pre-order it right after we hop off here. And
thanks.
thank you so much, Amber, of course, for joining me. I truly mean it. Like I have like literally a whole other page of topics I want to talk about with you that we
should
can
do
get
this
to.
again.
So,
for sure.
well, we'll have you back, and we're both in New York. I'm not right now. I'm in LA, but in the future, when we're both a little less busy, we'll have to do something in person. It'll make it easier to flow conversationally too, without the like video lag. And thank you so much again for hopping on here.
Thank you for having me. This is awesome.
Thank you so much for watching this episode of Overpriced JPEGs. If you liked this conversation, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and hit subscribe. It helps me out, it helps the show out, and it means you will get alerts and updates when we post new content. Thanks again.